This is Jeff Blauette, Technical Agronomist for Cooperative Farmers Elevator. We're out in the field here today, out in the bean field. It's late in the afternoon again. We're out and kind of 2/3 the way through July. And I thought we'd talk about, similar to last week's Field Friday segment, what stage we're in and what that means for our potential management decisions here going forward. With most management decisions, important part of that is what stage is the crop at. So I thought we'd look at that first. If we look at what these soybeans are, this would be an earlier variety. If you look at this plant's development, we've got flowers all the way up and down the plant, which signifies R2, reproductive stage 2. If we look at this plant, however, we also have some very early pod development. And if we look at that, within one of the top 4 nodes of that plant, we have a pod that's at least 3/16 inch of an inch long. That signifies R3. R3 is a very important time in that soybean's development for starting to produce yield, and that's what we're really after, obviously. So I thought we'd talk about a few things that we can do at this stage of the game and see once if some of these fit into your operation. First thing we'd probably want to talk about at R3, this is the stage of year where we're really starting to look hard for insects. We're starting to get towards that point, the last half of July, the first half of August, where a lot of our aphid applications have gone on historically. We've been out looking at fields this year. We really haven't seen a lot of aphid development. You can find them, but they're not really expanding in population or spreading out in a lot of acres yet. Probably one of the few benefits of, it's out here, it's hot again. You can see these beans have their leaves kind of rolled over here late in the afternoon. They're kind of under some drought stress like they have been lately. The good thing is with these 90-degree plus temperatures, aphids don't like that. They don't reproduce very well. Their life cycle, it takes a lot longer for them to double in population, and they just don't produce as many offspring. That's the good thing about this hot weather we've had, these 90-degree days. The aphids don't like it. The downside is, the thing that I'm concerned about here going forward, if we continue in this weather pattern, is spider mites really do like that weather. They have a Mother Nature's natural control mechanism for spider mites. There's some fungal pathogens that typically in a normal weather environment will keep them in check. They'll basically thin that population out, and there's generally some spider mites around every year if you really look, but they never really get to be a factor. This year, we could see that be a factor. We don't have enough moisture. We haven't had enough humidity lately, or rain for sure, as I'm standing on this cracked ground as we're out in the soybean field. We've been pretty dry, and that's good conditions for spider mite infestation. So we'll want to watch that going forward. That could be a management decision when it comes to insecticide application. Even if aphids don't show up, spider mites can really raise a lot of concerns with yield reductions in corn and soybeans as well. So that's one of the first decisions we have to make, is insects going to be a problem. Another factor we have to consider, R3 is when a lot of yield determination really starts to shift into high gear. That's when we can typically find that the sweet spot on yield enhancement from fungicides, especially the strobilurian fungicides, start to really show up. We can have yield responses a little earlier, a little later, but R3 historically is when we're targeting applications for, and that's because of historical data, and that's when our biggest yield responses have been. We're in this hot, dry weather pattern, kind of similar to we talked in last week's Field Friday segment. If we're really hot and dry, diseases typically probably aren't as big a concern yet, but the stress of these soybeans, that's where the plant health of those fungicides seem to really show up. When these plants are under stress, they're producing a biochemical called ethylene, and ethylene is kind of an immune response to fight off stressful conditions. The strobilurian fungicides have the ability to suppress that stress hormone, and by doing that, if that plant's not producing that stress hormone, it probably keeps producing yield for a little bit longer period of time until hopefully we get a rain to break this drought cycle and this heat, and that can add some yield. We've had some pretty good results even in dry years with fungicides. As long as it's a decent productive field, there's still some benefits there for sure. If you look at our data here, this is some multi-year data we've got from our replicated soybean trial testing. We've been doing some of this kind of work since 2011. This multi-year data is going to show you that we're upwards of 3.5 bushel yield response for a multi-year return. We've had multiple plots most years, so it's more than one plot and more than 1 year. So that's an indication of what we've seen on some good productive soybean fields. So that can be a profitable decision in a year like this as well. One of the other things that we need to look at, we talked about these soybeans, there's a lot of flowers, there's a lot of pods, and even some of these pods towards the bottom are already starting to develop some beans, some grain inside. These plants are trying to do an awful lot right now. They need everything they can get for nutrients, moisture obviously, but we can maybe have an impact with an application of a foliar micronutrient. We've been testing those as well, and if you look at this data, this is kind of all based on R3 application timing, but the micronutrients are in that 2.5 bushel yield response. Not quite as big of a yield response as a fungicide, but it is quite a bit cheaper application as well. And if we're going to be in the air with an airplane or out in the field with a ground rig spraying for insects, this is a pretty easy add-in, and our yield history has been pretty positive on it. So that's kind of some of the things that we wanted to have in your mind as we get into this time of year with the things that are going on in the soybeans today. Even with the commodity prices the way they are, we've got yield data. You can do the math and figure out if an application like that is worth it to you to try on some of your fields. Let us, at the Co-op Farmers Elevator, let us help you pick the fields and pick the situations where we're most likely to be successful with some of these strategies. That'll be this week's Field Friday segment. We'll see you next week.